Great. So moving into our agenda, just a few notes for the breakout session in terms of the housekeeping around it. We're going to have some introductions in terms of the panel. We'll then move into regulatory guidance on the topic of adverse media monitoring, and then talk about the evolution of the approach to adverse media screening, and then we'll have a discussion with our distinguished panel. So again, my name is Joel Lang. I'm the General Manager of Dow Jones Risk and Compliance. We are focused on helping both banks and corporations mitigate financial crime and comply with third-party risk. And it's a pleasure also to have Jeremy Ennis, the CEO of Ripjar, and Uday Mehta, Financial Crime Director with Deloitte. So just moving into the regulatory guidance piece, a strong compliance program in terms of screening of course, has to check against sanctions, and there is obviously in the AML legislation prescriptive guidance on politically exposed persons. However, in terms of adverse media, we see really a spirit of regulation around a spirit of guidance around what should be done within a program. But there is a certain lack of prescriptiveness in terms of the regulatory guidance around the world. But it is obviously clear that as organizations are audited by global regulators and reviewed, that if you don't have a world-class adverse media screening solution in place, that there'll be consequences in relation to the recommendations of those organizations. So when you embark on a program, it's really important to ask questions around adverse media. And there's a really helpful document that we produced last year called How to Get Adverse Media Right, where we had Victoria Mayer from the CIBA Academy contribute. And, going through these questions is really key. So, what is your definition of adverse media? What crimes do you want to include? Obviously, the more crimes you include or the more types of negative media, that the more volume that you'll have in relation to output. And how far back do you want to go? Increasing the volume of topics, increasing the number of years that you go back is clearly going to have an impact on the amount of data that you're screening against. But then also, how much of your data are you going to screen against? Are you going to take an 80-20 rule approach and look at your highest risk customers? Or are you going to try to do it holistically and consistently across your entire customer base? So in terms of the historic approaches to this, we've tried here to just evaluate the evolution of how firms have approached the topic. Now, a very efficient approach, and as AML screening became very popular in the early 2000s, working with providers that could structure profiles along various adverse media topics and screen name to name within a traditional anti-money laundering screening system was quite an efficient approach. It was also something where you could rely upon a provider to set very strict definitions around what adverse media was included, and the precision and recall is very strong. However, organizations clearly, have their own definitions of adverse media, and as we've just talked about in the previous slide, some organizations may want to cast a wider net, and as a result, may add, in addition to that structured data, unstructured data from a licensed media aggregator. We've also seen, obviously, many tools to go out to the wider web to scrape data, and that may uncover things that are important from a financial crime perspective, but it's also important not to commit a financial crime and violate copyright when you are seeking to comply. And so scraping obviously has its benefits, but also its pitfalls. And then we've also seen in recent years AI and machine learning systems really bring all of this together. And so there's definitely been some interesting developments in that space with which our panel will be able to help us to navigate. So really coming into the panel, just want to come into speaking with Jeremy and Uday. Maybe just to go straight into the questions and give you a chance to introduce yourself as well as jump right into a question. So Jeremy, just in terms of these types of implementations globally, What are the considerations for a global rollout that needs to be taken into account?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Joel. I'm Jeremy Annis. I'm Ripjar's CEO, as Joel introduced me earlier on, and we've got quite a few years of experience of rolling out adverse media programs globally to large financial institutions and other corporates. And we've learned that every one of those deployments over the years is always subtly different, but there are some common themes throughout them. And I would probably put those themes down into 4 sections. The first one is good data. You can't have a good adverse media screening program if you haven't got good data, and good data clearly covers all sorts of different aspects. There's the global coverage, or the global nature of the coverage of the data. There's the ability to also not just use media sources that are very credible and sort of internationally respected, but local insights within a particular geography are also essential. Translation as well is a critical function of that data. If we're seeing it in a multilingual sort of nature, often if the compliance program or the adverse media program is being run by a second line of defense, then clearly those articles need to be translated in some form back into their native language. And clearly noise as well. Lots of sources equals lots of noise as a rule, and we often see that many high profile risks are re-syndicated around the world over the course of maybe a few days or even a few weeks, and that can just produce spikes and an excess of work in the compliance program as well. Perhaps the second point is good risk classification. So across all of that data, we need to be able to understand where the risk is. We need to be able to understand it in multiple languages. We need to understand the nuances of different writing styles, different scripts, and so on, from media that is produced within certain locations. Then good name extraction. Names are expressed in clearly 101 different ways in different languages and different scripts. The cultural differences between how names are expressed in different geographies is also important, and seeing Jeremy Annis expressed in Latin in a Chinese media article is just combination of all the challenges that a good technology solution has to be able to cope with. And then finally, once we've got good risks, good media, and good name extraction, then we have to perform resolution across entity resolution across the names that we've been able to pull out of the media and the client population as well. And matching client populations to risky entities is always a challenge, especially globally, where the actual client populations can differ, depending on where they're actually onboarded, and the statistical differences through those populations just make it harder and harder and harder as well. So I guess those are sort of many of the technical challenges. Always got a different perspective on how they want to tune their adverse media program to best support that.
Thanks, Jeremy. And Uday, anything to add there?
Yeah, so just to introduce myself, I'm a director in Zurich at Deloitte, focusing on financial crime and forensics. And just to add to Jeremy's point, right, the expectation from regulators really is to consider global media for adverse media checks. And this is where the entity resolution that Jeremy pointed out to, it plays a very critical role in ensuring that the flagging of information and the alerting that is created for clients is sound. That's where the regulator expects it to be. And also globally, it is designed towards clients' risk appetites, but where we see a lot of variance. So there is not like a one solution that fits all as such.
Yeah. And so in terms of that specifically, Uday, when you see in Switzerland, when the regulator is coming in to look at what a bank is doing, is there a prescriptive guidance, or is there a specific thing that they're looking for in relation to an implementation?
Not really. I mean, there is no specific regulatory guidance. There is no prescription as to what is enough, how far you need to go, or what media outlets do you need to use. There is a clear expectation that from an onboarding side and a client due diligence side, that the banks or the financial institutes do go take the extra step as such. And this is where, especially in Switzerland, where we have stronger banking secrecy laws, it is very essential to maintain the false positiveness, because there can be an element of profiling the wrong customer if you don't have a strong entity resolution and a strong matching algorithm behind it.
And just on that, Jeremy, we talked entity resolution seems the new buzzword around reducing false positives. But what is the importance of that? Why is that such a critical element to these implementations?
Yeah, I mean, entity resolution has clearly been around for quite a while in the structured space, where structured names from a client perspective are then matched against a structured list, and it's a well understood problem. It's not an easy problem, but it's a well understood one. With the adverse media case, the challenge becomes even harder, where we're looking at, yes, the structured client record with any other context that's provided with it, maybe relationships, nationality, age, the typical discriminators that you might put into a structured screening program. But then you've got the other side in the adverse media, where Jeremy Annis might be mentioned in 50 different news articles, but actually there's 4 distinct entities with the same name as Jeremy Annis, and the entity resolution and essentially disambiguation between those entities across those different articles is the challenge. And it's a really difficult problem to solve at scale, at speed, across multiple languages, all at the same time, in a timely fashion. That means that the answer that you can provide to the compliance officer, makes sense for them in a suitable window. And so the two challenges there then are asserting that the entity is the same entity in the media, and that the John Smith problem, which we're all aware of, in different functions of compliance, is even more prevalent in the media. And it's actually not John Smith, as an aside. It's Adam Smith is the most common name that we see in the media, with risk associated with it. And so understanding the sort of second order behavioral characteristics of those mentioned entities in the media, where there's localized features in the news, such as relationships, their crimes, there might be monetary values mentioned, their age might be mentioned, that is related to the publication date of a particular article, so you can infer a date of birth range at a minimum, and then ultimately building a sort of a complex knowledge graph of all of those facts around entities, so that we can then do the second step of linking the media entities to client entities in a way that doesn't produce too many false positives, that is accurate, and makes the efficiency of the actual process much better. And I think the other challenge with it as well, with entity resolution in the adverse media space, is that the efficacy of the solution differs depending on the script and the language and the location. It is not, a precision and recall game that is a singular set of numbers for the whole compliance program. They differ across geographies, and it's that sort of tuning exercise that you need to go through with each geography and the different client populations that needs to be quite sophisticated as well.
Understood. And just for the audience, just want to make sure please do ask questions in the chat. We will ask those questions to the panel. But interesting, around the why organizations are making changes lately, and what we're seeing in global banks, global corporates, and embarking on adverse media projects. Obviously the adverse media has been around for some time. Why are organizations changing? And maybe starting with Uday, what you're seeing in Switzerland and also elsewhere in the world. What are the reasons why organizations are taking new approaches to this?
I think one of the elements is driven by KYC and new AML regulations, where it is not just about recording beneficiaries, but actually verification of beneficiaries. There is also kind of the risk element that regulators are asking financial institutes to do, is not just about their clients, but associated or pseudo adverse news or related persons. So this all has triggered kind of a continuous due diligence process in financial institutes, where there is need of using adverse media triggers and alerting in their regular processes. So I put it down to the verification of beneficial owner requirements from the regulator.
So Jeremy, that you may have organizations you work with have probably previously reviewed an entity maybe on an annual basis and conducted a full due diligence review. Are you seeing organizations looking to do that on a more continuous basis?
Yeah, definitely. I think historically the technology wasn't sufficiently capable of doing a continuous KYC for adverse media, and also bringing in any of the other KYC checks as well. And certainly when we first started out on this journey of adverse media screening, our customers were doing periodic checks of their clients, from a media point of view, and maybe they would do it once every 3 years, and the burden of doing that just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the sort of the volume and the breadth of adverse media that's available now means that you're better off trying to stay in front and get these checks done on a continuous basis, which just reduces the cost in the long run. I think we're also seeing, that from a regulatory perspective, the various regulators are seeing that it is possible to do these things at scale across a full client population. And so why wouldn't you do it? Because it just reduces the risk ultimately. And the signal that we see in the media for risk is often, not in all cases, but is often 6 months ahead of the risks manifesting themselves in perhaps a structured list or some other indicator as well. So it can be a leading tip of risk in your client population.
Okay. And Uday, in terms of these implementations and optimizing them, how do organizations handle the output from this? Are they staffing up, or is the expectation that the implementation will automate this process completely?
Well, coming from a technology side, I'm happy to say that more and more organizations are trying to leverage technology, trying to use better engines, better machine learning to tune the media, as well as what is defined as negative. That's where the focus is. The old style way of throwing brute force and bodies at it is less and less. There is continuous model tuning and leveraging of established engines that is happening right now in the market.
Got it. Well, we really appreciate everyone attending this session. We tried to answer as many questions as we could. We'll send you back into the forum now, but thank you very much for your attendance, and please do reach out to any of the participants if you have any questions further about adverse media, as well as the solutions that we've talked about today. Thank you very much.